Alright, hello. I have finally managed to record something from start to finish. That means the sketch, the lining, the colors. I didn't record some of the final finishing touches that I do after a piece is completed, and I let it sit for a few days, and then I realized, oh, that face looks wrong, so I go back and fix it. And I also did forget to record a small section during the coloring phase, but that's fine. I mean, I color so many panels in the exact same way, you're not really missing much. So here during the sketch process, I've cut the footage down so you'll see that skips ahead a little sometimes. That's because I make mistakes and then I undo them, and I was thinking, well, it might be a waste of time to make you watch things that I end up undoing. But if you like seeing that, I can include that in the future. Oh, and before I forget, the scene that I'm drawing this for is from Coder 2's dialogue file, and as far as I know, this version is not in the game. I don't know for sure because it seems like a low influence Atten scene, and I've never had low influence with Atten ever, but it seems pretty plausible that it's just not in the game. At least not in the way that the notes specify. The animation notes said that he should be getting a neck massage, and that they could try using an activate animation to simulate that, and it just doesn't seem like something they would have had time to animate or test out. And even if the voice files are there and the restored content mod added them back in, there are still limits on what the modders can accomplish with the cutscene. And it'd probably just be them standing there and delivering their lines. I'm not trying to point out that Coder's cutscene capabilities seem a little limited, but I'm just, belatedly justifying that there is a point to me drawing and fully coloring these two comic pages, even if this dialogue is already in the game, and even if this cutscene is just a minor variation on the one that's already in the game. And also, I started this whole thing just for Atten to say those two lines. Those lower two panels on the first page, that's all I drew these two pages for. I could have honestly just drawn those two panels and called it a day. I don't know why I had to go the full 2 pages, but I just had to have it end with him saying, yeah, why don't you try it? We'll see what happens. I just had to end on its cool line. I don't get it. Okay, for the twin suns, you'll notice that I didn't draw them very accurately. I don't know what their headpieces look like exactly. That's because I'm going off of one single reference photo. I have 100 for Atten, and I have one for the twin suns because I didn't want to load up my game and play to the point where I fight them and then stop and try and take pictures while in combat. Okay, I just realized that if I really wanted to get references for the Twin Suns without launching my game, I could have just gone on YouTube and found some sort of cutscene compilation or playthrough and gotten footage of both what they look like and what their spinning swords look like. Sorry, there's spinning blades. But the truth is, I just didn't care that much. I mean, I just confessed that I just did this for Atten's two lines, so I really don't care that much. Uh, Also, another sign of me not hearing that much is that you'll notice that my lines, in my lines, they look the twin suns have regular ears. At that point, I'd been going off I saw a mod that adds 3D ears to Twi'lek males. And I know that's a weird thing to mentally visually reference is that mod picture. But I was like, oh yeah, those look like normal ears. I'm pretty sure that's fine. And then guess what? I Google Felix, and the women just have blobs for ears. It just looks like they have blobs. I can't tell if it's artistic license, um, or a simplistic cosplay or something, but they just look like straight up blobs with no definition. So I was like, hey, that makes my life easier. So I redrew the ears as blobs. And I don't care if that's wrong. Alright, so when I color with line art, or when I color with a sketch, I always make the line art a color other than black. So here it's purple, but sometimes I'll use blue, or red, or an orange, like it just depends. So I could just make each individual line art layer that color, like in this case purple, but it's kind of inconvenient because if I decide that I want to go back and make a quick edit to that line art later, I'd have to, color pick the line art color before I can make any changes so that I don't mess up the color. So instead, I collect all my line art into its own folder, and then I clip my line art color onto that folder so that if I do make changes to the line art, I can do it with whatever color I happen to have on my brush, because that clipped layer over everything is keeping all the color uniform. So I usually like to keep my line art light because I don't really do line art. I mean, you can even see here that I'm using a textured brush. I'm not using vector layers, and I don't close my gaps in my lines. I feel like those are all things that have come up when I've seen people talk about line art and like line art tips. I don't do those things because I like to be hard on myself, I guess. It's really just part of my workflow where I won't say that it's efficient. Like, I'm not saying that it's like a great workflow. But I sort of treat it like an illustration, where I like keeping the liner as a guideline, more like, because I've been boxed in by my line art before, and I don't really like to have to fuss around with it to get perfect lines. Like, when you really get down to it, I just like to paint. So when I start coloring everything, I like only about half my definition to come from the line art, and the rest of it comes from how I shape and shade my color layers underneath it. And like, when I do need extra definition, like for the facial features especially, I'll just have like a separate layer for the eyebrows and eyelashes, and because my liner is light, I can sort of tweak the expression a little bit with my colors rather than have to go back and edit my lines. So when I actually start putting down my color layers, I use a fill layer, I'll just call it a fill layer, for each character or component of the background first. So like one layer for Anne, one layer for each of the twin sons, one layer for the table, and layers for the background components. So when I first put the fill layer down and cut it down to size, I don't worry about what color it is, but I usually end up making it a color that I use for the character or the component. So like for Atten, I use the white of his shirt. I do this mainly because I have a lot of layers. Like, scrolling through all my layers is a pain. So later, if I want to access this fill layer, I can just Control-Shift-Click the visible white of his shirt to go straight to that layer. And after I do that, I add all the other color layers per character. And since I do use a lot of layers, I feel like I got up to like maybe 400, but I did also delete some layers, so maybe there's only like 300 in there. Anyway, I use a lot of them, so to better manage my space, I group all of these additional color layers into a folder that I clip onto the main fill layer. And this also comes in handy if I want to make a major change to like their silhouette. I can just make the edit on the fill layer and see how it looks quickly. If I didn't gather all my color layers in a folder and clip them to a fill layer and just, have them all out there, individually cut to size, I'd have to modify multiple layers every time I wanted to try a major change like that. Alright, so I'm just going to call all these color layers that I've split per component, so like jacket, skin, hair, I'm going to call them my base colors, because they're my base colors per component. So my goal here is to build depth, define my shapes, and make it look like I spent a lot of time and effort on it. I do spend a lot of time and effort on it, so I mean, a lot of that is not faking, but it's more about getting the most of your time that you put into it. So what I used to do is that I just cell shade And sometimes I'd have, multiple layers of cell shading going on to try and make it more complex. But all those cell shade layers have generally hard edges. And what I found is that if I just added a gradient underneath it, something with a soft edge, and if I chose a gradient that complements and adds depth to the base color, I can make my shading look more complex than it actually is. And this works because I'd have my cell shade layers set on multiply, so that my shading is influenced by the color variation provided by the gradient underneath it. So, whereas before you just had 2 colors, the base color and the cell shade color, you now have 4 colors. The base color, the gradient color, and the shaded base color, and the shaded gradient color. And the more colors that you have on the page, as long as they're still coherent, not muddied up or anything, the more complex it looks, and the more it's like, wow, you must have put a lot of time and effort into it. And I'm going to do that same thing using layer effects to add extra color variation with my highlights. And this is why I like also defining some sort of strong light source. So since I've been doing a lot of Star Wars fan art lately, there are a lot of bright lights to choose from and exaggerate. So in the cantina, there are these reddish pink lights all around the edge of the ceiling, and I have stretched the truth a little bit and said that that's going to translate as a strong pink overhead light. It's artistic license, okay? So for my highlights, I have 2 layers, one with a relatively hard edge and one with a soft edge. For the hard edge, I have a layer set on Add Glow. Now sometimes it's Glow Dodge, it just depends which one looks better to me. And I go in with my regular brush and define the high points of the form where I think light would hit or where I think things just look nice. And then I'll have a new layer set on linear light, and with a soft brush, I'll add my softer light over it that modifies and in this case warms the color beneath it even more. Layer effects are really handy because it's easier than the alternative of you sitting down and individually color picking every color you want to put on the page. That's hard to do for me at least. And that's more like what you'd have to do if you were in a traditional medium. Here you're in a digital one, so might as well take advantage of it. Sometimes I'll go into my hard shading layers, which are set to multiply, and clip a layer onto them and paint the edges with the color that's slightly lighter and with a slightly different hue than the one I use to shade. I usually do this when I'm shading skin. I'll do my main shading with what usually ends up being a desaturated beige, and then I'll choose a redder, pinker hued version of that to paint the edges and add some interest. This is also an attempt to simulate that effect when light hits your skin, and because there's blood underneath it, the edges of the shadows it casts are reddish, I won't pretend that the way I do it is at all accurate or informed by any sort of actual reference, but it fakes the effect well and adds a little life to the skin, which can look dull if I'm not careful. Oh, and you might be like, wait, how can you clip that pink edge layer onto the beige layer if the beige layer is already supposed to be clipped to the skin layer? And the answer is that I put the beige with the clipped pink layer in a folder and set that folder to multiply and clipped that folder to the skin layer. And yeah, I do end up with a lot of folders in folders and folders that way, but it's better than the only alternative I know of, which is to use layer masks. Layer masks are not too immediately flexible. It's like you'd have to make the same edits to 2 layers rather than just editing 1 layer. I would rather have the extra layer folders. Anyway, that's a long explanation of how I color. It's really just the most recent way I've been doing it. Honestly, I think that the coloring stage is probably the most satisfying because you're the closest to the finish line, but it's also just really tedious to get all these in. I mean, I like figuring out my initial colors. So that first big panel that I did on the first page, that was fun. That was interesting. Every other panel afterwards, I'm just doing the same thing over and over again. So that's boring. Oh, and for the Twin Suns, you'll see that I used blacks with two different undertones, one green and one blue. It's just so that there's some sort of difference between them. I didn't want them to just kind of like get muddied up and meld together. So at this last panel, I kept thinking that that wall was kind of strong, and I wasn't really sure how to relax it because of the construction of the cantina, you kind of get the sense that there's like a shadow cast on that wall coming from the left, but I want the left to be lighter so that the Twin Suns stand out. And you'll see that I end up making it lighter. I know it's not correct, based on my game screenshots, but who cares? Artistic license. Oh, and you didn't see it because I cut it out. But I did spend a lot of time moving the dialogue around and trying to figure out what goes where, and what looks best with the flow. Who knows if this is easy to read or not, you know? I don't know. I'm too close to it. I've been working with it. So maybe if I wait a year and come back, I'll see how easy or hard it is to read. Oh, and so Clip Studio has all of those ruler options and a perspective tool. I don't know how to use the rulers really. I haven't looked it up yet. So I'm just making do with perspective tools. I just make a new 1-point perspective and use that for straight horizontal and vertical lines, and I don't use like the diagonal lines that go to the vanishing point. So that's like my ruler. And like if I need to draw at an angle, I would like to be able to use a ruler for that, but I haven't worked out how to make that efficient for me yet, so I don't do that. So sometimes on like the upper right in the navigator window, you'll see like other images show up there. Those are my reference images. I have them open on the screen as other floating windows. So like the window on the left that I have there, that's I captured that separately with OBS, but I do always have that visible on CSP when I'm like working with the files. And I also have my reference images open as floating windows, and those are sort of in the center left of the screen, and that's why I drag my actual workspace to the very right, even though there's seemingly nothing in the center. I just didn't think that I needed to capture my reference photos on OBS. I just don't. They're just not very interesting. It's literally like a screenshot from someone's YouTube video, or like my carefully curated collection of cropped Atten photos from screenshots that I took in the game of like 170 degrees of his face. If you're wondering why it's not 180, it's because I don't have like a full profile facing left yet. I am looking to collect them all. I know I have like a bunch of folders in folders. And I put both pages onto the same CSP file. So whenever I save it, it kind of chugs a little bit, and whenever I export it, it's kind of like dying inside. Alright, and I think that's it. This, I don't remember how long this took in total. Like, I'll put it down in the description, I guess. But it took a long time. Like, I don't think it's worth it to color these in full color. I might just do like a simple grayscale in the future for everything. Like maybe I'll go the extra mile for the line art like I do here, but just grayscale. I like coloring like this, but maybe I'll just save it for illustrations, you know? Anyway, thank you for watching, And I might have more stuff like this in the future if I remember to record things. Also, you should let me know what you'd be interested in seeing me record. Because I know that, I mean, this isn't what I draw all the time. I'm not like a comics person. So just let me know. All right, bye.